Leadership isn't just about making decisions, it's about making informed decisions. In this episode of Leading Out Loud, I sit down with Alastair Gamble to discuss the intersection of leadership, people, accountability, and the legal realities leaders face every day. Alastair, hello, welcome. So today's guest brings a unique perspective to leadership conversations, the intersection of people, culture, accountability, and the realities leaders face every day. Joining me is Alastair Gamble, an experienced labor and employment attorney. So scary lawyer is with us, but he's spent years helping organizations navigate really complex workplace dynamics and leadership challenges. And quite honestly, is an amazing human being, spicy and fun, and makes legalese not boring. I appreciate you here today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. This is fantastic.
Yeah, it'll be fun. If you don't mind, can you kind of just walk us through your career history and how you ended up in this field?
Sure. This is sort of an unusual origin story in the sense that it's very boring because I announced, I believe, at the age of 8 that I wanted to be a lawyer. And for some reason, it stuck, and I never changed it. And I was a pre-law in college, and I knew I didn't want to go to a law school right after college, so I went to the Army for a little bit. But then I ultimately came back and went to law school in Arizona, and then I clerked for a year, but then I started my practice in general. And I had pretty much figured out by that point I was going to a law firm. I wanted to do labor and employment. I had sort of done some consultancy work in the HR field before that. So I knew that that was really where I had a natural interest. But for the first 11 years of my career, after my clerkship, I was in private firms, big law firms on the defense side, representing big corporate employers, in all range of employment matters, but mostly in litigation. That was really where my focus was. And then after 11 years in private practice, I decided to move in house. I moved to a company where I met you that was 2019. I was there for about 4 years as an associate general counsel in charge of both litigation and labor and employment law. And then starting in, I guess, the end of 2022, I moved to my current position where I continued to be in-house for labor and employment and litigation. So in a sense, it kind of feels inevitable. If I look at my career, everything sort of seemed to be exactly where I was heading from the beginning, but it's still been a very exciting and very, I guess, fulfilling career.
Yeah, and you have been a great partner when we had the privilege of working together. And I want to be clear because for those that know me are probably thinking like, oh, we met because he got me out of jail. That is not the case.
I
All
would have
right,
happily come and get you out of jail. I would have. I so would. So
good, because you are on my list of the first people to call should that event ever happen. But, I digress. So digging into, how this role supports leaders and businesses, from your perspective, where do you feel like leaders most misunderstand the role of legal in an organization?
no, that's a great question. And what I would say is, particularly for younger leaders, there's a dance that you have to do because I think lawyers sort of carry, whether or not this is deserved or not, we carry a certain gravitas into a situation, right? So once the lawyers are
Yeah.
brought into a situation, it's sort of like, oh, well, they have the rights. And actually, that's not the way it should be. What I am here to do is advise on risk. It is my job is to make as the leader, all the stakeholders aware of the risks and the possible consequences so that they can make the ultimate decision on how to move forward, right?
Mhm.
Now, the amount to which I push will depend on the circumstances, will depend on the degree to which I am the subject matter expert, the degree to which there is a risk rewards benefits. Are we tossing the dice and we could actually see a really grand result that we want? And we're sort of judging that against what the risks could be. Or is this just kind of like there's only bad consequences and how to mitigate those? That's typically where the lawyer is going to take more of the lead, right? Because at that point, it's a cleanup job. But really, what you should think of with your legal department is these are the guys that help me make my decision better informed. And, me, a better informed person to anticipate what the contingency should be.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. We have a lot of listeners that are in private practice. So they don't have a legal department, but for some, they do have like a lawyer on retainer, or there are these services they can reach out to. I would imagine, and not to assume, but in your opinion, is it just as important for private practice to also consult when faced with maybe something that they've not navigated before or feel like it's in a gray area?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think you're always going to have to measure cost with return. And unfortunately, particularly if you're at a smaller startup company and you don't have a lot of experience working with an attorney, you're either going to want to use them all the time because everything seems new and
Yeah.
scary. Or more likely, because lawyers are ungodly expensive, you're going to want to use them only when you think the sky is falling down on you. I would say this to the extent you can identify early where you think the sort of legal risk is going to be at its greatest and really pick your moments. But when you do use them, take their advice, try and learn from it. That doesn't mean follow their guidance blindly, but really try and understand the nature of the risk that you're doing. And to the extent possible, I mean, this will also help control costs, do it proactively rather than after the sky has fallen, right? Or after you've made a mistake. Sometimes you're not going to be able to know, right, with a smaller company or one that's growing where that line is. And that's fine. Mistakes will be made. And for the most part, you'll know if you're about to make a decision that could topple the company. And usually, when your instinct tells you that, that's when you should call the lawyer. But everything else. I think the other thing, too, is when you're in that position, try and either through advice or just kind of think through and temper your own anxiety. For example, in the labor employment space, if suddenly a company gets sued for discrimination, that carries a lot of weight and baggage, right? And I think people who have never been in that kind of position, I have to remind myself all the time that the people I'm dealing with and my internal clients haven't been named on an EEOC charge
Yeah.
before, right? It's scary for them. It's not scary for me because I've done 500 of them,
Right.
but it's scary for them. And to sort of acknowledge that and sort of say, look, this is what's going to happen. This is what the risks are to you personally, et cetera, et cetera. This is how the company will really sort of talk them through and handhold a little bit. But if you don't have a lawyer who's remind themselves to do that, feel free to ask, is this scary? Is this bad? Am I about to forever tarnish
Yeah.
my fledgling company with the mark of a sexual harassment suit or something? Which is not to say don't take it seriously, but really try and get an honest assessment of the risk and then make a level-headed decision.
Yeah, I agree. And, that's something that has come up a lot for me with working with more novice leaders, particularly depending on the state within which they reside, right? So we know that there are some very employee centric states versus others, and it can be scary to navigate just leadership in general to the point that I think sometimes it paralyzes them and a willingness to make a decision because they are so fearful of being sued. And something I've always told these leaders is, as unfortunate as it is, at the end of the day, anyone can sue anyone for anything. It doesn't mean it's real or valid or you misstepped. But as a leader in a leadership role, you do have a responsibility to make informed decisions. And we do carry some with us in navigating those everyday decisions, but we have partners like yourself that we really should lean on when confronted with those uncertainties.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think as a new situation comes up, rely on the lawyer, ask all the questions up front in the first meeting until you are satisfied that you basically know what's going on, right? And then you make the decision from that point. And again, if you have a good lawyer and
Mhm.
hopefully you'll be able to find one, you should be able to get really clear advice. And in the employment space too, when to your point, it is very easy for somebody to assert a claim in the employment space. I mean, because the very first step in almost all jurisdictions, even in blessed California, is you have to file a claim with the state or federal agency, the EEOC or the state,
Yeah.
analog state agency, right? And so you'll get notice. It's not like, you're being served with a complaint that day. So you have a little bit of time to figure it out, do a little bit of research, call your lawyer, right? Set up a meeting and respond appropriately. And I think that if you take all of those steps in sort of even measure, I mean, obviously act promptly, but, do it and just sort of say, okay, this is the thing. Put yourself at ease. This is something that every company has to face. Like I said, it's very easy for an employee, an aggrieved employee, to file a claim, take it, and then start listening to your lawyer. What are the bad things that could happen down the line that we should
Mhm.
be looking at for right now? What documents should we preserve? The basic questions that you would, and then start making your strategic decisions partnered up with your attorney, your in-house counsel, and sort of move forward from there. And after you do it 3 times, honestly, you'll kind of get your sea legs for it. Every once in a while, even in my, wizened 20-year career, I still encounter situations where I'm like, oh, wow, I did not think.
Yeah.
I thought I had seen it all. I clearly not. But really, truly, 95% of the situations that you're going to encounter are pretty much the same. Somebody's made a complaint. There are different processes depending on what the claim is and what agency was filed with, and what the options are. For the most part, they all are pretty much managed the same way. So once you get your sea legs, you'll sort of start to see it, start thinking even keelly about it. And then, hopefully what you'll do is build into your developing company both a culture, but also policies and practices
Mhm.
that are proactively geared toward this situation from happening,
Yeah.
so that eventually the goal is that somebody can threaten to go see a lawyer and you'll just be like, that's fine. If
Mhm.
you want to do that, you can do that.
Yeah.
We know we're doing everything correct. And then with that confidence, you're able to move forward. And, every time somebody threatens a lawyer, you don't have to call your $300 an hour
Right. Right.
outside buddy and seek reassurance.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I mean, speaking firsthand, I've been through these things before, just given my roles in organizations. And even when you did nothing wrong, it's still a little jolting. Sometimes it's even like it hurts you personally because you're like, they're lying on my name. Like, how can they say these things about me? But again, I think to your point, as you evolve, you're setting policies, you're making decisions in a way that is equitable so that if and when you're ever faced with this, you have a degree of certainty that you didn't misstep. And maybe it is just a disgruntled employee and you go through the paces and it is what it is. But, you know, there is a way to lead and not be terrified, I would say. With your experience, Alastair, what do you feel separates organizations that utilize legal as a strategic partner versus a reactive function? What does that look like?
So I really think that it is integrating legal in the development of policies, practices, development, and also periodic reassessment,
Mhm.
adjustments, making sure that they are an active partner in that process. Now,
Yeah.
again, any company needs to learn how to use the legal department because there is an intimidation factor. I like to pretend that it doesn't exist, but the truth is, the second lawyers show up, then people tend to be quiet, and that's not what I want. And so, particularly in the implementation of policy, I want pushback because I don't know.
Yeah.
It, it certainly don't know. I'm not the subject matter expert on how we're getting things done. That's you as the leader, right? So
Hmm.
you're just developing a policy that is procedure based. What are you trying to accomplish? What
Yeah.
operation are you trying to achieve, right? And
Hmm.
then what I do is on this, not the back end, but sort of I help you shape it in a way that makes sure it is compliant. I can use my experience oftentimes now to suggest ways of improving or adjusting to account for certain concerns or contingencies. Right. So, in that respect, I think I am now at the point in my career where I can really match that energy. So, if you push back, I can push back on you and it's mutual. And right. But that takes a while to develop into that relationship, an organization with its legal department. And I also think it takes a certain kind of level of experience on the attorney's behalf, right? Because you have to realize, I mean, one of the things I tell myself all the time is I could be looking at a leader saying, I think you're making a big risk. I think
Hmm.
you could be about to make a big, regrettable mistake.
Yeah.
The thing is that I've felt that before. And then you know what? It panned out perfectly and we got all the benefits of the risk that we took. And I didn't get any of those. I didn't get any of those kudos, nor should I. Just as if I tell you that it's okay to do something, you're not to do something, and you follow my advice and the world crumbles, I'm also not taking the heat for it, right? I made my best recommendation, but you're the decision maker. And I think the more people just understand that they are the decision maker, legal is a very valuable resource, but they are not the decision maker.
Yeah.
I will make it known, but I will tell you, I mean, I'm sure you and I had several of these where I'm like, I really think we should go this way. And you say, well, I get that. But I think what I need to do, I need to focus on getting us here. And what you're describing is too much. And let's just get there and we'll clean it up. Right.
Hmm.
And there is an art to assessing where that line is.
Yeah.
But I will say to your point about what differentiates a meh company as opposed to an excellent company in terms of the way that they use their legal department, it's about having the bulk of the leaders being able to have a relationship with the legal department
Yeah.
that maximizes that.
Yeah. And I would say also respecting and trusting in the guidance because, like, I've seen it, you've probably seen it too, where you're giving recommendations and then the leaders are like, nah, no. And
Mhm.
you're like, no, really, I really don't think you should do that. So there's that ebb and flow. And I do think also the synergy, right, of working together, you get to know each other. You do start to accumulate that history of like, okay, yeah, it worked this way when we did this, it didn't work when we did that. And like, you just kind of build that knowledge, if you will.
Yep. Yeah, and I think from the legal perspective, there are certain leaders that I trust intrinsically. I don't have to sit there and make the bet. I can just come in and say, this is where I see the risks are, but I don't even make necessarily a recommendation unless they ask for it because I know they know what I'm signaling.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's forged over months and years of working together. But when you get to that point, I think it's a great working relationship because they really will then they start to call you all the time, right? It's not a reactive thing. It's like, hey, we're about to do this. Does this sound good? All right, that sounds great. All right. And then it's just like I'm constantly having that information and that consultation brought to me. I don't have to go out and seek it out, which is the best,
Right. Right. You're not trying to clean stuff up after the fact.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is-
And it also gives me a sense that things are going well.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be, with an eye on compliance and then sleep better at night.
Yes, exactly. In your experience, what is one common quote unquote small decision leaders make that often becomes a major legal issue later?
So, wow. Okay. I would say within the sphere of labor and employment, it is
Mm.
making snap decisions about terminations, making sort of unplanned rifts, even small ones. Those are, I think, there's this sort of, particularly with younger leaders, pulling the trigger on a termination is sort of a tense event, right? I think we all feel it. I mean, still after 20 years, whenever I sit in a termination meeting, I feel a little bit sick to my stomach. I have to sit on my hands, and I think we should feel like that because what's happening is not it's not good for somebody in the room.
Right.
But at the same time, I think people get too focused on the wrong thing. And I think as a result, they go in and they're like, okay, well, I feel like I need to explain myself because of the awkwardness, particularly young leaders. They want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They want to reassure them, I really like you. It sends a bad message. And I mean, or it sends a mixed message, I
Yeah.
should say, right? Respect the person and tell them your decision. You have all the power in the room. You're telling it, say it's final, and then you walk out. That is honestly, it feels like it's clipped. And I think the other thing is to really, and this is sort of terminations writ large, if you're doing a reduction in force, consult with your attorney before you pull the trigger. There are so many pitfalls in a reduction in force. You can easily walk into hundreds of thousands of dollars of liability if you don't handle your risk properly. That's one of those things that it seems like it's just firing 10 people or firing 20 people. It's not. It's a different animal altogether. There are different compliance levels, different states, and triggers a lot of, I would say, an experienced attorney will tell you that if you're going blind or the criteria you're using to choose for a RIF, those sort of, it feels like a small decision. It feels like just it's, a bunch of terminations. We're just trimming the fat. It's actually a monumental decision that can really have repercussions. And then my third one is partially a joke, but it's partially also true. If you're going to do any business in California, I would not take that decision. I've been shaking my fist at them for the last 20 years. I swear to God.
I mean, well, mind you, like I managed there how many decades? I've got a little PTSD.
Yeah, no, I will tell you this is a side story, but I had a meeting with one of our outside counsels for California because we're working on an exemption to the oversight to overtime in their state laws, and it is one of the most convoluted. It's kind of a hybrid exemption for what they call inside sales. At any rate, the point is, I like to think of myself as a smart man. Certainly, I've been able to be a lawyer at a high level for a number of years, and I was like drawing diagrams and I was like I was just like staring at it. And I was like, how do they expect like the average of small business?
Yeah.
There were two lawyers, one a partner at a major firm, and then me, like trying to sketch out what this looks like, and we couldn't do it. And I just thought,
Oh,
prayers for the lay person who has to try and figure this.
That's fair. Changing gears just a tiny bit, I want to talk about performance management because this is something I think there's a lot of leaders that don't know how to utilize performance management. I think they unintentionally misstep.
Exactly.
In your experience, how should leaders approach performance management to protect both the business and the employee?
Yeah. So I think to start out philosophically with performance management,
Mhm.
this is a tool to help your employees do their job. And, certainly in your own mind, you can't help what the employee is going to think about performance management tools, particularly if it's written up, because then you're in trouble, right? You
Yeah.
can't help that. That's been ingrained in us since we were in kindergarten. Nevertheless, if you as a leader think of this as this is my opportunity to communicate my expectations, to get these folks not out of their bad behavior, out of their bad performance, but this is for me to help them maximize their performance for the benefit of the organization. I promise you. Now that's a big ask and it involves a lot of steps, but when you get to that point, it's going to be very intuitive when you need to point it out, right? But it is really about I would say you really should start on day 1 setting clear expectations, reinforcing them and not letting it slide. And I'm not saying be a stickler, be a jerk or be prescriptive, but when you see somebody not doing it right, you correct them and you make sure that they do it. And, do it up front because then it's training, right? Then it's not a write up, it's training, right? I'm helping you get to learn what your job is in this, even if you've done your job before, what it looks like in this company and with our workflows and our operations, and really sort of have that tone, right? Because then it's training. It's okay for you to make mistakes. That's what we're here for. And then when you hold them accountable, there's no question later on, if they're still not doing it, they're still not performing up to stuff, there's no question whatsoever that you have clearly communicating the expectations and they, for whatever reason, have been unable to. Right.
Yeah.
And so then it's a conversation about, all right, well, you know it and you didn't do it. So what's the problem? And that's a much better conversation, I think, for all involved. It's also the other goal of performance management if you do it that way. One of the things I say all the time, you don't actually have to be 100% compliant across the board. What you have to do is just not piss off enough employees so that one of them brings a lawsuit. Now, I'm not saying I go around just, ass kissing employees, forgive the language, to get them not to sue. But my point is that there's some times where, you know what, this is 1,000 times easier and better for the employee. And we're going to do it in their best interest.
Yeah.
You're going to like this result, right? It doesn't matter if it might go awry of some, random regulation. The employee is happy. The employee is satisfied with the result that they had. They're not going to sue you over something that's good, right?
Yeah.
I can complain over something that's good. And so I think that if in the same principle with performance management, if they feel like they're getting clear direction and that these are tools for them to achieve and be good at their job, because believe it or not, everybody doesn't want to be good at their job. They want to go to work and feel good and feel like they know what they're doing, that people respect them. And you can have a really, really great employee who, because of those formative first few weeks, they just don't kind of get it, right? Because you didn't set the expectations clearly or like, didn't have the processes designed well enough. And they're never going to reach their full potential, right? Because they're just not going to have that relationship with
Yeah.
you. Because then all corrections it will be a slap on the hand. That's very demoralizing. And when I see it in that pattern, I pretty much know it's probably not going to pull out. And unfortunately, most of the time I have to blame the leader rather than the employee. Sometimes it is the employee, right? They just check out.
Yeah.
They don't have any interest. But I would say more often than not, in that dynamic, particularly if somebody who really believes they're trying and just aren't getting there, it is really a failure of the leader. And it is what it is. And leaders are allowed to make mistakes too. But the takeaway from those situations, both the employee who's, being fired and I'm sure go home and think about ways that they can improve. The leader has to see that as well as an opportunity to see, could I have done better, and really look critically and make the next experience a better one.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And what I've seen time and again, and some of it goes to, I think, many leaders are conflict avoidant. And even though part of their job is to help sustain a culture of accountability, and part of that is performance management, disciplinary action is needed. I think where employees often get really frustrated is it's inconsistent. And if the leader could consistently apply the rule in a similar fashion, the employees are actually happier. And the one that comes to mind that, I mean, I swear I talk to every new leader about this attendance. It's always an issue. They never address it. Or it's like, oh, yeah, well, we tried and then we stopped and then we tried and then we stopped. And I was like, well, your employees know you're not going to do anything. So you are a culture of come when you'd like because we are not going to hold you accountable. You can't all of a sudden hold one person accountable. So, to your point, I think it's as a leader, a lot of that burden falls on them. It is their responsibility.
There is, and I would say that for me falls in the bucket of your consistent holding of accountability, holding people accountable for the expectations you set is part of the communication,
Yeah.
right? It reinforces, it says, I'm serious.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right when it comes to things like attendance, because the truth is life is so busy. I've got an ugly commute. Sometimes it'll take me an hour to get in, and on a good day, it's 25 minutes, right? And do I have to think proactively on that? And usually I'm running around trying to brush my teeth and get ready, right? And it's very easy to fall into bad habits. And if you start early and consistently, it's
Hmm.
like, this is just not something I'm going to try and negotiate with my boss, right? He's been clear. I just don't want to pick a fight. I'm going to make an extra effort to get there on time and stay my full amount, right? And once you do that, honestly, once you get in the habit of doing that, then it's going to be fine. And then, like you said, the standard is set, it has been communicated not only for the individual employee who's affected, but everybody around it who sees it, right? So that's the other thing, is that a consistency not only between manager and an individual employee, but the manager and the
Yeah.
entire team.
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about documentation with you. So, yes, there is performance management, which often includes documentation. And I know you've run into this countless times, as have I, where we're partnered with a leader and they're saying, this person does this all the time. It's been chronic. And then you're like, do you have documentation? No. So, how should leaders think about documentation? What matters? What doesn't matter?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And in fact, I was thinking about this exact question when I said, I think the best thing that you can do is really set an early, clear expectation,
Mm.
because I think what often happens, and I see this is not only just young leaders, it's sometimes because you said it's hard to have conflict, to confront folks, to get them in trouble. That dynamic is ugly and it's demoralizing for both parties. And I think what happens is that people will just not write them up. Meanwhile, getting privately more and more frustrated.
Yeah.
And then eventually something happens where it just kind of ticks over. And now you're a bad employee.
Yeah.
And now I want to start writing them.
Mm.
And my job is just to get enough documentation to get you out the door. All right. Well, so first of all, that's unfair to the employee. It's a bad long-term strategy because you missed the opportunity already. Like I said, then you get in this pattern where it's unrecoverable. But number two, and this is a real issue for me, is that what it looks like is all of a sudden you did something and now you're being targeted.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't necessarily make it unlawful, but certainly it's going to put the employee on their back foot. They're not going to know what's going on.
Mm.
They're not going to know why we had 2 years of you being fine with me. And now all of a sudden, everything I do gets me another level of write up. And I will say that depending on exactly what it looks like, it can raise eyebrows at the EEOC or with a plaintiff's lawyer,
Mhm.
because they'll say, like, wow, so really you had no documentation,
Right.
no performance issues whatsoever. And then in the span of 6 weeks, you got 6 pips. And yeah,
Right. Right. Right.
that looks like that is of the nature that it could be retaliation. It could be, some kind of unlawful or unfair act. And one of the things I wanted to say before that I do when new folks are encountering a labor and employment claim, what I think a lot of people don't understand is that nobody ever proves these claims by what they call direct evidence. Nobody says, I'm going to fire you because I hate women, right? It's no, that's direct evidence that
Yeah.
shows in. I'm doing this right now because of
Yeah.
discriminatory animus, right? It's all through indirect or circumstantial evidence, right? And
Mhm.
so it'll be like what they call disparate treatment, which is you're treating all the men a particular way, but then you're treating the women differently, right? That
Mhm.
doesn't evidence a clearly articulated animus toward women, but it kind of demonstrates
Yeah.
that the leader in the organization has that animus, has that
Yeah.
discrimination. It can be done in sort of other tangential ways. Like, for example, you haven't written somebody up and all of a sudden you're writing them up. It's a sort of a deviation for what you say your policy and practice is.
Right.
It'll raise an eyebrow. Well, what was the reason for that?
Mm.
Right. And the second you get an outside person looking at a company, right, and there is a bias against company. I'm not crying about it, but it's a reality. And leaders need to recognize that, particularly once you get to a certain size, you've crossed over to the dark side just by virtue of you being
Yeah.
a mega corporation, which usually means 100 or more employees. And everything you do is going to be scrutinized. Somebody's going to assume you're doing it for bad faith motives. And you really should, if you know, do all the things that we're talking about, you're going to have a culture that proactively addresses that. And so circling back to your main point about documentation, if you set a clear expectation, you hold them accountable, right? And you set this relationship. When they make a what I would call substantial lapse in
Mm.
that performance, you should document.
Yeah.
And as best as you can, you don't have to follow a strict, most employers of a certain size have these tiered disciplinary actions. There's a write up and a written warning, a final
Yeah.
written warning, and the suspension and all this stuff. Yeah, you can do it. And some companies really follow that process, but most don't. But I would say have a written warning, have a final written warning, and then for the other ones, an email to the
Yeah.
file. I had document, even I just had this conversation because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, those emails are better than nothing,
Yeah.
right? If you have 4 emails saying, "I had to talk to him again, this employee again, about missing these deadlines or about turning in sloppy work," that's a whole lot better than nothing. That really
Sure.
does show that there wasn't anything unusual that happened
Mhm.
once you start to formalize it. You have proof that this was a problem going back,
Yeah.
right? Now, again, on the flip side, you also have to be mindful that discipline of any kind of documentation is going to freak the employee out. It's going to affect, their
Mhm.
comfort, their trust. And again, it's something you have to learn as a leader, and sometimes you have to learn with each individual employee. So don't start at documenting every tiny mistake.
Yeah.
But if you see somebody making a lot of mistakes, maybe it's time to just have a sit down, reset, clarify that, and then document the clarification.
Yeah.
Thanks so much with an email to the employee that sounds friendly, but you say, look, thanks for meeting for today. Just wanted to say these are the 3 things that I really want you to focus on.
Yeah.
And if you do that, put it in the positive, right? But you identify in that document, we see you've been having some problems with this. So once again, we framed it, we taught you again,
Yeah.
and we told you what it was. And now we're at a point where we're going to start documenting. And hopefully, if you go through that progress, the employee will see each one of those steps as I need to get my shit together. And usually, if you do that right, they'll self select. If they're not making the mustard, they're going to self select because
Yeah.
nobody wants to get fired. And if you set those expectations clearly and they know they're not doing it, and look, every once in a while you get a toxic employee who just thinks that they're the greatest genius ever and you're just all morons. But for the most part, people are going to say, okay, this just isn't
Yeah.
where I'm supposed to be, and they'll self select.
Yeah.
And that's the best solution.
Right. Right. That's great advice. So, if you could give every leader a legal playbook, what are the top 3 rules they should be following?
The first one is the one that I have to remind myself of. Don't put anything in writing when you're angry. I would say just in general, emotional regulation is important for anybody who's mature, but certainly anybody who's a leader of a company, overseeing others, right? You have a responsibility to your employees. You have a responsibility to the organization, of course, but you also have a responsibility to your employees, right? You're providing them with the support that they need to do a good job. Hopefully you're able to provide that. And be mindful that the tone you take, right, with somebody, as genuine as the frustration may be in the moment, it does not help get your point across. It can, depending on how severe it is, it can really alienate the employee and make a situation that was, maybe just a bad day into the beginning of the end for a particular employee. Right.
Mhm.
So learn how to have your game face. Realize at the end of the day that there are very few circumstances where anything is an extent a threat to the business or to safety Now, for those, then it's we have a broader array of emotions we can bring to the table, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes we need to yell to make a point to scare people, right? But
Mhm.
you pick those moments.
Yeah.
Uh, I think for the most part, more measured, you can be clear, you can be stern even, but really measure yourself. And I think that solves a lot of legal problems, believe it or not, because it means, first of all, you're being considerate, you're planning what you're going to say, and you're unlikely to say something off the cuff
Yeah.
that'll come back to bite you. And number two, it makes a safer place for the employee. So even if you do everything right, if you alienate them, maybe they'll just go to a lawyer anyway, right? Which you don't want to antagonize them. You don't want to make it seem like it's us against them.
Yeah.
So that would be the first one that I would. Number two is though and this goes back to you are the decision maker, right? But what that means that you get to take all the credit for the decisions that you make that pay off. It also means you have to take all the decisions for when they don't. And so that should encourage you to seek advice and make it collaborative. And I promise you, it's one of these things that once you get into the habit of doing that, collaboration becomes just part of the culture, right? It's just what you're doing. Hey, we're chatting, we're doing it. Nobody questions it. You have ownership over nobody. Everybody knows you're the decision maker because you usually have the title. You're the one who signs the checks, whatever it is. Everybody knows who the decision maker is. So come in there with the confidence of making a decision and also come in there with the confidence to be able to take advice, to take somebody else's analysis on the possible risks. Do I think this is a good idea? Does this sound stupid? Don't identify yourself with the idea. And the reason why this is important from a legal standpoint is it's going to make you make clear, risk-based, logic-based decisions. And oftentimes you'll be able to plan for contingencies. And then this beautiful idea won't get shot inadvertently 2 weeks into it because you didn't think through all the plans, right? And so just to get to yourself a point where you're really collaborative with everybody, including the legal department, but also if it involves people with HR, to invite more advice in than maybe you think you need, just to double check. And ultimately you're going to get the credit for it anyway. So just make sure it's as good as possible. I think it's another good rule of thumb. See, a third one. I think when you make a decision, particularly tough decision, if you're going to make a decision to terminate somebody, own it. This is your decision to do it, right? They always say the at-will employment arrangement is that either party can terminate the employment relationship at any time for any reason. You are exercising that privilege, right? Now, the employee could have just as well said, you know what? I got a higher paying job down the street. And you hope they do it with some tact. Nonetheless, they own that decision. You own yours, and don't come in there hemming and hawing. Own the decision, understand the ramifications that it makes on the other person. I promise you, if you think about it that way, the employee will, no matter how bad the news is, but hopefully it won't be a shock because you've done all the steps before it. So they know that they're not meeting their expectations. But however bad they may feel, they'll feel the respect that you didn't quibble, that you didn't sort of say, look, you're really great. You're a great person. You're a great whatever. You just own the decision, right? We're
Yeah.
here to talk not about your role as a person. It's just that we need to make a change. I've made the decision. And then the short and sweet statement and then move on. And I think that probably extends to others once you make a decision, hey, we're going to go in this way. Everybody's going to orient that way. Don't second guess them and
Yeah.
pull them. So that's where I see a lot of sort of inadvertent, unintended legal consequences coming. It's sort of like, oh, well, nobody knew what they were doing and everybody's just doing like this. And then it's a
Can I add one that's going to make you completely cringe?
mess.
This is just a PSA, and it's my personal opinion. I think not only for leaders, I think for anybody, a 2-drink maximum at any work event, be it a dinner meeting, a holiday party, maybe stick to that. Just plant the seed today, consider it. I can't tell you how many times the issues develop not from the day-to-day work, but from somebody not handling their alcohol and making people feel really weird. And guess what? Even if people don't come to you, they're all talking about you, about what was happening.
Actually, completely agree. It's not cringy at all. It's completely true. And I think in the legal profession in general, I mean, if you look at the numbers as it relates to alcohol abuse, it's pretty startling throughout lawyers in general. I mean, it's something like, I remember seeing a statistic that was like 19% drink 5 or more alcoholic drinks a day. And I mean, so 1 in 5 lawyers is hammered by like 6 every day. And I will tell you, I used to always be at happy hour and approaching, I think it was 38, but I was like, I'm getting up there. I felt I needed to give something up. I gave up booze to the
Yeah.
gods, and I've not looked back. And I'm
Yeah.
really glad about it. But I will say, and though I didn't make, not that I remember any bad mistakes with alcohol at work, certainly it could have. And I've certainly seen many, many people make bad decisions. I get that oftentimes in a social situation, particularly, you're having to hobnob with your boss and other people, and you want that liquid courage to make it seem more pleasant than it is. I get that. But the truth is that you can really mess up. If you get rid of your inhibitions and you lose your judgment, you can really make an error in judgment very quickly, and it's not worth it. Wait until you get home and then pour your sympathol in.
That's right. And to be transparent with you, for myself personally, as a female in business that was climbing the quote unquote corporate ladder, I was particularly mindful of that, not only because of what I've seen people doing in the past, but what I didn't want is to ever allow someone an opportunity to suggest that I was drunk and said something or stumbled. Right. So it's like I would have one drink max. That would be the drink for the whole night that I would nurse throughout the night because I just didn't even want to open the door for somebody to try to create a narrative. And honestly, it can be a career killer. And people, I think, don't put enough weight on that. So I had to say it.
I think that's actually right. And depending on exactly how messy you get, it can be, not only in your career effectively at a particular company. I mean, it can really mark you. And I've seen lots of examples of that where it's not only just alcohol, it can be other substances as well. And, the second you get associated with it, and look, I mean, I feel for anybody who's had to deal with addiction. And I
Uh,
mean, but it causes a real stain on your reputation. And even you can recover, but there's still going to be people out there who see you as your former self. And the truth is that if you want to maintain your judgment when you're in a work event, stop thinking about work as some place where you deserve to have fun. It's not fun. I mean, hopefully you like what you do and it
yeah.
gives you satisfaction, but it's not playtime, it's work time.
Yeah.
And look, again, my record is not completely clean. Again, I don't think I have anything that embarrasses me buried in there, but at the same time, certainly it could have, and I'm glad I made it through and where I am right now. But I will tell from my position, if I see people drinking, like you said, more than 2 drinks, I do. I mean, just internally, I can't even help it. It's sort of like, where
Yeah.
does he is,
To be honest, I'll avoid them. Like that has happened because I'm like, I'm not even trying to get involved in that. And
Right.
quite
So,
honestly, I prefer to be messy in other ways. So, no,
but so sort of on that point, I mean, I just know I have what's the word? The way that I express myself, particularly when I'm around people that I'm very familiar with, it's not bawdy per se, but I mean, I cuss and I'll make comparisons and, I'm just kind of being provocative. And if you have a good, clear sense in yourself for where the line is, you have a personality and it's playful, that's great. But the second you add a little bit of booze to it,
yeah,
then it suddenly gets exaggerated in the
yeah,
wrong way. You're not monitoring your tone as much. And then suddenly your playfulness comes across as deadly inappropriate. And again, even if the consequence isn't that you lose your job, you may have just alienated, you may have ruined their day. You don't want.
yeah. And that's why we're friends.
That's right.
Well, Alastair, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. This is something I feel particularly for private businesses. We don't talk enough about it to educate these leaders and team members. I almost feel as you were talking like we should be flashing your phone number across the bottom of the screen. But I
Right.
also worry that you would be inundated with calls. So I will include your information for anybody that wants to look you up. But thank you so much. It was
Think this was great. I think this podcast in general, it's a great idea. And I mean, everything I said, I think honestly, is what I would say to any young leader, coming up. This is how you should think of legal. This is how you should use them. And yeah, I hope everybody finds that helpful.
thank you.
Thank you.